off until you want to say something. You know, take
Okay.
yourself, toggle yourself on and off of mute. That would be great. Or if nobody's going to bother you, you can
Okay.
leave it on and we can have this as a conversation, whatever you'd like to do.
I'm fine with whatever. So,
Okay, let's until we get somebody else on. Let's go ahead and leave the mic on if that's okay.
all right.
It'll feel a little bit more like it's a real class.
Yeah.
Well, today I wanted to move into the next module, but before doing that, I wanted to say something about all the due dates. I'm noticing Canvas has this feature where when I bring the class over from the previous term, it's supposed to automatically do update all the due dates and everything, and it doesn't look like it's doing that correctly. So I don't want anybody to get stressed out or anything. This is an online class, and in my online classes, I realized that everybody's a human being, and you're taking the online class because you're not able to take, a physical class, and so there needs to be some flexibility there. And because of that, I I will put a 0 on the thing on the grading thing if something is late if I'm grading it, but that is only to remind people to get it done because then Canvas will remind you that it needs to be turned in. It's not because you're not going to get zero any points. You can with, and I'm really glad Charity you're here because I wanted to reiterate that regardless of the score you get on something, you can always turn it in for additional resubmit it for additional points. Like for
Yeah.
the contour drawings, if you only got 25 of the 30 little drawings done and you didn't go full points, you can always resubmit with the missing drawings, and then you'll get more points. I mean,
Hmm.
that's just what I do. But I also want to remind everybody that with Canvas, it overwrites every submission. So if, for example, you submitted 2 out of 3 things and you only got 3 points, for your attendance thing, you don't resubmit with the one additional item. You have to resubmit with all 3 items in order to get full points because Canvas will rewrite every previous submission. And so that's true of quizzes and everything like that. Does that is that understandable? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you use Canvas in regular
Yeah.
school?
We
Okay.
do.
So it's set up sometimes differently for different institutions that use it, but for Utah Tech, that's how it's set up. So you just have to resubmit with all the files at once that you want to include.
Okay.
The other thing is I wanted to reiterate as well. The art department made a statement about potential visual nudity in the art that we see, and this is an art history class, and it's an introduction to art. And sometimes the human form is used as a subject matter for art, but I have tried to go through and make sure that we don't see an awful lot of nudity if when people are sensitive to that. And it's not like we use this as a forum to show that off anyway. But when we look at things like the Renaissance, there might be some. And
Yeah.
like at Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo painted God and Adam as without any clothes on, but it was to demonstrate the power of the human form. And the first time Adam and Eve actually wore clothing was after they got kicked out of the garden. And what I have a problem with is when people use the human form as a commodity or to excite people, and that's not what the art that we're looking at is about. So if anybody's sensitive to that, please let me know. And please be mindful that we are looking at art that is considered to be important, and we're not looking at it to be offensive. So with all that being said, what I wanted to do is go over this module and touch on the 4 tools of artistic critique as again as well. Did you watch last week's recording, Charity?
Yes, I did.
Were you aware that the Lion King was actually about a human being?
I had thought that it was based on Hamlet before. That's what some people have
Oh,
told me.
that is really good. I like that. You know, I bet a lot of it is, but there is a famous king in the history of the continent named the Lion King,
Yeah.
and a lot of people who study him say that a lot of the narrative for the Disney movie came from his life, which is kind of interesting. And I see, now that you say that, I see a little bit more of Hamlet there. I think my favorite, Hamlet has been redone so many times, but my favorite is in actually the old movie Last Action Hero, where Arnold Schwarzenegger plays Hamlet and he ends up blowing up the castle, I think that's just awesome. But in the 14th, I want to say 14th century, so we're talking 700 years ago, the grandnephew of Mansa Musa, who is the wealthiest man in the history of recorded civilization, he when he was 12, he started a campaign and he became a prince, and then he became a king, and then he became an emperor. But what he did was, at that time, a lot of countries in Africa that are south of the Sahara Desert were ruled by really evil people. Mansa Musa had set up governorships, and after he died, people took advantage of their power. And sorcerer kings came into power, where they would threaten people with magic, and people were being really terribly abused. And so, what his name was Sundiata. What he did, the grandnephew of Mansa Musa, and he was known as the Lion King, was actually his name. But Sundiata went around and he would conquer the lands away from the sorcerer kings and from the evil governors, these really corrupt government officials, and he would turn around and put the leadership in the reins of the honest people that have been trying to defend themselves against these sorcerer kings and the
Yeah.
corrupt officials. And he brought freedom of religion, and he made the government pay for people to learn how to read, not so that people would become super smart necessarily, but he wanted primarily people to learn how to read so they could write contracts and defend themselves against the corruption, which I think that's pretty amazing. But he conquered and then freed and liberated a number of kingdoms and countries between the Atlantic Ocean and Ethiopia, all the way across that southern Sahara part of Africa, which is more than Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great ever did. But nobody hears about him at all. And I want everybody to learn critical thinking and the 4 tools of artistic critique as a way for you to talk about the art that you see, but also you can use it as a tool for figuring out what are the things that make you recognize a particular style. Like behind you on your wall, well, not on your wall, but on your curtains, there's a particular style of flower, and then that's iterated as well in that blue flower that's in between the two curtains. We can see that there's this particular style, but we can use the tools of artistic critique to actually articulate what that style is, so that if you wanted to, you could reproduce it in different colors and you could reproduce it in different flowers. And so that's what we're going to be doing with Sundiata. Just having a little assignment here and there to touch on that. And then towards the end of the term, you're actually going to be making something that looks like it should have belonged in the old Mali Empire 700 years ago, but never did. And I've had students make leather messenger bags, jewelry. One person made an iPad that looked like it was belonged in those times. I think I mentioned last week, water parks people were doing, crochet. And it was because people were paying attention to what are the colors, what are the markers for the visual style. And when we can look really close like that, what is interesting is it helps our brains to think better. And it applies. I've had people in the nursing program on campus that said that learning about how to properly critique something helped them to become better nurses. Can you believe that? It applies to everything. So before I touch in the module, I want to uh, invite everybody to look at that. What are the 4 tools of artistic critique? Find that page in the first module and just go over that again. And next week, we're going to do a demonstration. But the 4 tools of artistic critique are: first, describe, where you talk about what the thing looks like, how big it is, what colors it has, what style it's in. The second is analyze. How do you think the artist made it? How do you think the people at the time, what was their technology that they used that went into making this piece of art? The third is, oh, and of course, since I'm teaching, I completely forgot what the third one is called. See, describe, analyze, oh, interpret. What could it possibly mean? But more than that, what does it say about the person's worldview who made it? Like when you see Japanese anime, there's some that's really brutal and dark, and there's other anime that's really happy and light. And both those things say something very different about whoever made it. Or if you ever see anything by Studio Ghibli, it's going to say something very different too. And then the last is to evaluate. Is this artwork or is this thing that we're looking at successful for what it is? Like, for example, if somebody said they were making a spoon and it had a big hole in the bottom of the spoon, it's not going to be very good as a spoon. But maybe they're making some sort of comment about consumerism or eating or the process of eating. You know, who knows? I remember one person made a set of silverware for the habitual dieter. And so the fork had tines that were only like 1/8 of an inch long. The spoon had a hole in it, and the knife was basically just a stick without a blade, because they were talking about how fruitless it was to for the person didn't feel like they were getting anywhere when they were eating. And so sometimes when we know the context, sometimes when we can precisely describe what we're looking at, it helps us to get a better idea of what the artist is trying to communicate. Because just like writing and other types of language, art is a form of communication. Can you see that? Or do you recognize that? Excellent. Very good. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I want to go through the module now. So give me a short half an hour while I share my screen. Actually, I could do it a lot faster than I used to. Okay, this is what module 2 looks like. And then we have the navigation bar down here. And I just want to go through and go touch on each of these different things. And Charity, if you don't mind, we're going to finish at 8 o'clock. And so if you want to just watch the clock and keep me on track, I sometimes get sidetracked. So I just want to spend maybe 8 minutes or so on each of these things or less. And we'll talk about them. So first, module 2 overview is the purpose of this module is to talk about why is art important. Now, before we go on, I do want to stop sharing and talk about that. Why do you think art is important? But even before that, what qualifies as art? What is art? What are some of the things, when you hear the word art or when you think about it, what are some of the things that you think of that art can be?
I feel like art is a form of communication. whether to like yourself or other people. It's like passion. It's like what you want to show it in like I don't know. It's like your emotions, but like on the page and like where other people can see it. So like
Yeah,
it's just a way of communication.
I think all of those are really good. I think that those are really good because, and it's difficult to talk about it, isn't it? Because when we use art, we're not using language. We use art because we don't have the words for it usually. And so it is a hard thing to talk about. I love being in a class when I ask students to define art because nobody's able to. You know, if we could talk about it, we wouldn't be using art. But I want to propose not really a definition, but an idea of what art is. And you're absolutely right. Art is first and foremost communication, but it's not restricted to the confines of words. I think art is anything that we do that didn't exist before, where we're asking for outside help. And that outside help is help that comes from anything outside of our regular conscious day to day mind, regular thinking. So when we are trying to look at our subconscious, evaluating our dreams, trying to think of our higher self, or the breath of the universe. You've heard the word inspiration, of course. Inspiration has at its root spiritus, which is Latin for breath. And there's a lot of historical traditions of art where, for example, Turkish calligraphers, when they do their calligraphy, they will inhale as they pick up ink with their pen or their brush, and then they exhale as they apply the ink to the paper. And I asked one why they did that, and he said it was because they're breathing life into the calligraphy. So this kind of idea of art, if it's anything you do that hasn't happened before, and it's anything that you do where you ask for help beyond yourself, like what would your future self, what would your subconscious self, what would if you have an idea or a belief in a deity or something greater than humanity, you know, what would that want you to do? Suddenly it's no longer limited to things like painting. Art can be dance, it can be singing, it can be movement, it can be storytelling. But art, if you are farming and you're asking for help to do a wonderful job in the field or to grow vegetables, that could be an art. I know that you have seen fantastic gardens and lawns that people have done. You know, that becomes art. Have you ever had a teacher that was just really, really exceptional that brought the best out of the kids that they were working with? And I've seen that with my own kids in preschool. The teachers, some of the teachers that they had were performing art when they were teaching. So if I ask the question, who's an artist in a room full of people, everybody should be raising their hands because everybody does something at some point that didn't happen before. And everybody at some point is asking for outside help. You know, they're collaborating with something beyond their limited individual self. One thing that you said that I really, really liked is it could be for yourself or other people. I think there's an element of art where you need to connect somehow, and that's what applies to communication. But sometimes you're connecting with your future or past self. You know, sometimes you're trying to figure out a problem, and the only way you can figure it out is by creating something. And then when you're all done, the art has fulfilled its purpose, and you could throw it away because you don't need it anymore. It was there to make those connections in your brain and bridge the past to your future self. And I love that that is something that you pointed out. So I think art is important just for the factor, from that fact that it allows us to communicate and create something that's beyond our regular, ordinary selves, or at least to create something that's in collaboration with our regular, with something beyond our regular, ordinary selves. This module, I think it is really good because it talks about different aspects of that. You know, why is art important? And we can go down here. Charity, if you don't mind, you're gonna stand in for the rest of the class if that's all right. And I won't ask you all of these
That's,
questions. What's that?
that's all right.
All right. So if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and I'll just ask you a couple of these questions. What kind of job do you hope to have later on in life, and how are you going to go about getting there? Or what aspirations do you have for your future career?
I feel like I'm okay with any future career just as long as I am with people. I feel like I don't really like being alone all of the time. And I don't know what I really want to go into, so I'll figure that out
All right.
later.
So you eventually you want to do something with your life that's social, where you're interacting with people. That's really nice because it
Yeah.
opens it up for a lot of different kinds of things. But if we think about, if you're an auto mechanic, for example, you are going to be interacting with people, but what could art possibly have to do with that? And it's fascinating because it almost doesn't matter what career you want to go into, what kinds of things you want to do. You're going to be social, you're going to be interacting with people. As you do that, you're going to be asking yourself lots of questions about, what are these people trying to tell me? How can I fill their needs? And what I love about that is that has an awful lot to do with art. Because if we talk, like you said, art is communication. It's communication outside of the limits of word. And as you're interacting with people, have you ever heard what percentage of communication is nonverbal?
I've never heard so much.
Well, and I've heard several different things about it, but this is one reason why sometimes when we're upset with somebody and they text us, we can read their text as being sarcastic. I've heard anywhere from 80 to 90% of communication between people is nonverbal. And so you have to be constantly asking your higher self, what is this person trying to say? And I think a lot of that has to do with art. But we're going to talk about just a couple of reasons why art is important and what possible use art has in our culture. One is art does preserve culture. If you've ever been to a museum, any of the museums around here that are historical, we can see things that you're not going to have any other opportunity to see. Now, this shows an example of an indigenous artist who creates things in the old style of these grain baskets. And that is one aspect. My sister, who is Shoshone, she did traditional Shoshone beading on leather, and she made baby shoes and moccasins for people. She made my mother a pair of moccasins that were absolutely gorgeous on white doe hide. That's a tradition that she was keeping alive as an artist. Uh, I have a friend who does tomoko, which is traditional New Zealand tattooing, and he was actually put in jail for bringing it back because when he started at the end of the right around in the 90s, traditional New Zealand Maori tattooing was still illegal according to the British government. But because of his research and what he did and risking going to jail for doing his art, not only did he bring back the tattooing tradition, but he brought back an awful lot of history that could have been lost to the Maori people forever. I think that that is just amazing. And that leads us right to another reason art is important. It actually does document history. What are some of the subject matters that you see all the time in art? What are some of the things that you see? I see like landscapes. A lot of the times people will paint other people that they know. Or for a while, the gentry in the 18th century and 19th century would have professional portraits done of their favorite horses. And that's still a big thing in some states, like in Kentucky. That's still a big thing. Well, a lot of what we know about costumes that people wore, how they would dress every day, how they would bridle a horse, even how they would do the tack on a ship, comes from art. In a very real sense, it documents history. So it's important from that perspective as well. And this image of Night Cafe by Van Gogh, this is beautiful because it really shows how Paris felt, 100 years ago when he painted it. And I think it very interesting. Art, as you were talking about it, art communicating, it can talk about ideas and have us think about ideas in ways that regular writing finds very difficult to do. And there is a particular type of art that started growing in the late 50s, early 60s called conceptual art, where instead of using the tools of art to build something, they would use the tools of art as tools to help people think about different things. Like, for example, this image of a conceptual piece was created to help people start thinking about consumable culture, how ubiquitous paper is in the office setting, corporate structures. When something is everywhere, do we respect it or do we abuse it? Like, these are totally unused sheets of paper that are crumpled up and can't be used anymore. But then also, what is maybe another idea is what's special about the shape of a piece of paper? Charity, are you familiar with the term golden section or golden ratio? That
Um,
is,
yeah.
oh,
I
you've heard
am
of
with
golden ratio?
I've heard of the golden ratio, not of golden section.
Well, that's really good. Golden ratio is a really is a term that a lot of people hear. Golden section is another term for the same thing. But this describes a particular set of proportions that the Greeks really celebrated. But if we look all through history, we can see it showing up everywhere. But it's something that our unconscious minds use to describe proportions as to whether or not something is attractive. And what's interesting, if you hold up your hand like this and hold that up to the screen, yeah, your hand describe when we put the fingers together, that is describing the golden section. And if you go like this and curve your forefinger, I don't know if you can see that. So bring your
Yeah.
forefinger out. Right. From the tip of your finger to that first knuckle, if that is one section, then if you look at the tip of your finger to the second knuckle, that's the golden section proportion to that first knuckle. And then if you look at the rest of your finger, each of those sections of your fingers are not only golden sections proportions to each other, but also they're golden section proportions to the next two together. So, and that's how your whole body is. It all seems to fit this idea of the golden section or golden ratio over and over again. When babies first look at their moms, uh, or their parents or a nurse, when they respond, they will respond to a smile because scientists believe they're uh, comparing that smile to some sort of innate knowledge of a golden ratio already. Which when I heard that, I thought that was absurd, but there's actually several different scientific studies talking about that. And all over the world, people from different cultures and different set levels of technology, when they look at something that they describe as beautiful, the thing that is consistent is this relation to the golden ratio, which I think is amazing. Now, why is that important with Tom Friedman's two crumpled up pieces of paper? Because your cell phone, the books you use, and these pieces of paper are all proportionate to the golden section. Did you know that?
No, I
So
didn't.
it is everywhere. So this art speaks directly to that as well. Now, have you ever seen an artwork that just takes the words out of your mouth and all you want to do is just look at it?
I
That
guess
idea.
so.
What's that?
I guess so.
Yeah, the art. In some cases, art can elicit wonder. It can become amazing, like a fantastic fireworks show where you just have no idea how to respond to it. Or when you turn a corner as you're walking through a museum and you see a painting that is just absolutely beautiful. Art gives us this sense of a broader universe and world and how we fit within it that just goes way past what words can do. And art is important for every field. I mentioned working in an auto repair shop earlier. Cars are meticulously designed, and even the parts that go into cars are meticulously designed to be expressions of things like the golden ratio and visual balance. So they're designed to be beautiful. I think that's amazing. And then we also look at fiction informs reality. I love this because you see an image of this, a science fictional landscape. Are you familiar with Star Trek, Charity?
I'm familiar with Star Wars.
Okay, Star Wars came about 20 years after Star Trek, but Star Trek was this science fiction show that took place in space, just like Star Wars. And one of the things they had was a communicator. There was a little box that had a lid that you'd flip open. And the person at Bell Labs who developed the cell phone that you and I use every day said that he developed the cell phone because he wanted to have a communicator just like in Star Trek. Can you believe that? And then you mentioned Star Wars. One of the registered religions, it's an official religion in Australia, is the Jedi priesthood. Did you know that? And the tenets of the religion are respect for all life and paying attention to how everything fits together. I think that's pretty fantastic. One of the most amazing things about Star Trek and Star Wars is that both of them are these fictional realms that were created as artistic visions for film and television that deal with ideas of people getting along, people resolving conflicts, people coming together. And it's interesting to me because on political stages, when people are talking about coming together, a lot of the times they will make references to both Star Trek and Star Wars. So next time you look at people talking in a political setting, be aware of that because they will bring up things like that. And I think it's pretty amazing. So art, there are a lot of aspects to art that are really important. And this is just a few of them. Now it looks like on my screen, it doesn't show the images. If you guys don't mind, Charity and everybody else, when you watch this, as you go through a module, if you see that a link is not working or you don't see an image, please email me and let me know, and I'll see what I can do to fix it. Okay, because these are supposed to be images here, and they're not, and so that's something that I'll need to fix. When we talk about how to think about art, is there a right way to think about art? And this is a really good question. I don't really know if there is a right way to think about art, but I do think that there are several right ways to try to think about art. And when we do that, I there are different things that we can do that will really help us to think constructively about art. What what I see a lot of the times is when legislators decide to defund art programs in schools, for example, they say that art is a waste of time. And I think that if you don't understand art, it's completely true. It's like trying to teach sign language to an octopus. What's the octopus going to get out of it? It's not going to care. It's a waste of time. But if we can think constructively about art, that opens up an opportunity for us to grow our vocabulary and to think creatively and constructively about everything else too. Would you be surprised to know, Charity, that blue as a word did not exist before about 300 BC? Now, we can see in ancient things that, like the Etruscans and Greeks, did use blue before then. And in ancient Chinese and ancient Indian imagery, we can see that quite a bit. People did use blue, especially Mayans. The Mayans used so much blue pigment that it was from a particular blue clay that was in the Yucatan. They used so much of it that they dwindled their own resources. And the Mayans actually there's evidence to show the Mayans went to Florida and Georgia in the United States and mined the blue clay that they had to use from there. But there was no word for it, which I think is really interesting. The Greeks would describe, like with Homer, he described the sky as being a brilliant or a bright or a golden sky. And he would describe the ocean as being a wine dark sea. But I think that that's really poetic and beautiful. Do you think that people never saw blue before then? Or do you think, yeah, I think you're right. I think they did see blue. They just didn't use the word. Now, you could, with the hexadecimal system and the advances with computer screens, there are hundreds of thousands of distinctly different shades of blue that you can call up if you do a digital painting. And I think that that's astounding. When we're babies, we're either crying or not crying, generally. And when you're not crying, it's because you're satisfied or you're sleeping. And I think babies pretty much have two general emotions. Either they're satisfied or they're not satisfied. If they're not satisfied, what do? Yeah, they fuss, they cry, they let you know. And when they're satisfied, they don't. When they're unsatisfied, it could be because they're hungry, it could be because they're wet, could be because their diaper is really nasty, could be because they have an earache, maybe their mouth is dry. They just don't have the words to communicate. By the time you're our age, as you're an adult, how many emotions do you think you have?
Like,
I'm sorry? I said it looks like the mic isn't working, but now you can express hundreds of emotions. And if you're upset, there's a kind of upset because you did the wrong thing. There's an upset because you're embarrassed, but there's also an upset because there's you hurt yourself with an accident, like you stubbed your toe. You know it's an accident. You're not blaming anybody, but you're still upset. Or you could be upset because somebody bumped into you on purpose. There's lots of different ways that you can express yourself that you couldn't when you were a baby. And that is one of the beauties of being precise with your language. Now, why am I talking about all that? It's because if we are able to use precise language as we think about art, as we talk about art, then not only are we able to more clearly communicate what we see when we look at art or how we're responding to it, but we're also better able to appreciate and think more clearly. So utility is a word that means usefulness or practicality. And if we are able to control how we can think with more precision and be a lot more clear-headed. So this, I'm going to talk just about the four tools of artistic critique. And critique, I think, has a bad rap. It sounds like a negative word, but critique and critical should only mean doing it on purpose. And I think when people say that somebody's being critical or they want to critique you, a lot of the times they're trying to hide behind language, and they're just looking for an excuse to be a jerk. But that's not what critique should be. Critique should be being able to look at something with intent. So when we look at this image,
I don't know where he went, but I'm gonna leave.
I am sorry about that. It looks like the call was dropped. And so there's a couple of minutes of quiet time there. And I hope that Charity is able to rejoin. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show this image and then walk through those 4 steps of artistic critique. Remember, critique or critical should mean with intent or on purpose. It should not necessarily be a negative thing. So as we look at this image, what I see, it is a spiral, and it looks like it is stairs. And it looks like there's a few people that are walking up the stairs. I see a hand here. I see people walking right here, and there's hands. But it's an interesting view of a spiral because it looks like we're standing at the center at the top of the spiral, looking straight down the middle. So it's a unique perspective. And I say there's stairs because there's these regular geometric shapes that seem to be stacked in front of each other. And then it looks like this is a banister. It looks like there's a dark carpet that is down the center of white stairs. It looks like there's a wall there. And it looks like there's some sort of pole here. And I wonder if that's some sort of elevator. I don't know. But that's what I'm seeing. And so describing is really important because it helps us to appreciate what we're looking at, so we can explain it to somebody else. Some of the questions that we can ask are, what is the content? And are there objects we can identify and list? I think so. We saw hands and people. Is the work abstract, realistic, or non-objective? In this case, it is a real scene. So the artwork that we're looking at perhaps is the architecture of the stairs themselves. What are the predominant colors? Well, we talked about white. We talked about this might be brownish red. There's like a teal backpack here or a teal shirt. So there are some colors that we can identify. What's the first thing we notice? I think that spiral form is something that we see really, really easily. And another question is there an overall mood or effect? I don't know. It looks kind of relaxing. It looks like it's just people walking upstairs. And then the last question, what are other questions we can ask when we describe the work? I'm thinking, well, what's the point of the image? Where could they be at? Is this the inside of a lighthouse? Are people visiting this because it's a famous building? I'm thinking that this area right here, there's all these steps right here, and this area is big and flat. Maybe this is a landing. So this is actually in a hotel or a building that has a spiral staircase, and there's a door right there. But all these things we're using to kind of express what we're seeing. Analyze is where we talk about how something goes together. And the questions here are, what are the elements? How are they organized? How is the choice of materials affecting the piece? Do the materials feel consistent with expectations, or are there surprises? How do they fit together? How do you think the artist made it? What did the artist do to give the feelings that they communicated? Now in this looks like it's all made out of reeds, but it looks like the reeds are woven together somehow. And the artist did it in such a way so that it looks very organic. This feels to me like it's a building built as if Dr. Seuss had designed it. And the artist took a lot of care weaving these sticks together, sometimes even like these two walls here, and sometimes almost haphazard, like here. The sticks seem to be going everywhere. But you can see by the scale, it's big enough for people to walk through. So analyzing helps us to kind of get inside imagine maybe how the artist put stuff together. The next one is interpret. What does the piece mean? And some of the questions is the artwork accessible? Is it created for a specific targeted audience, or is it for more people to enjoy? Are there symbols in the artwork? Is it formal or conceptual? Does it rely heavily on your knowledge of society, on popular memes, or your understanding of history? Can you tell what the artist is trying to say? Or is the artist just trying to get you to think about things in general? This is Joseph Kosu's 1 in 3 chairs. And I'm sorry, the image seems to be really yellow. But what we can see is here's a folding wooden chair, a black and white photo of the same folding wooden chair, and then this is a dictionary definition of the chair. And this is in a gallery, so we know that it's meant to be perceived as art. But if we're to interpret it, how can we find the meaning in it? Well, the definition, I think, gives us a clue. And the title, 1 in 3 chairs. What are the 3 chairs? Well, there's the photo of the chair itself, and the dictionary definition. That's the 3. What's the 1? And I think all these relate to the idea that we have in our mind of what a chair could be. How do we define a chair? What does a chair mean? What does it take for an object to be used as a chair? And actually, this starts giving us an idea that maybe we're supposed to be thinking about, where does meaning come from? Where do our expectations lie? What are the definitions that we use to come up with our expectations? This was first shown, I believe, in the 1960s. And during the 1960s, a lot of people were reevaluating their position in the universe at large, what their position relative to formal religion and even politics, to governments. This is when the US got involved in the Vietnam War. And this is when people started really being loud about how everybody needed to be treated equally. And a lot of people that were used to the old ways felt that that was an affront to the nature of reality. This is where we hear a lot of things where it's the nature of things to be like this. Well, and that is really rarely true, that it's the nature of things. Like, for example, It used to, at this time, men wore pants, women wore dresses or skirts. That was what society expected. But if we go back a few thousand years to Babylonian times, men were the ones who wore skirts, and women wore pants. And that's true of a lot of different cultures. They flip flop back and forth. So saying that something is that's just the nature of things, it's our cultural expectations. And it's interesting because even though this is a photo of a chair, and a drawing, and then or a definition of a chair printed out, Joseph Kosuth is getting all these ideas coming into our heads. And I think one of the interpretations is, how do we deal with our expectations and reality in general? I think that that's really fascinating. And then evaluate, is it successful? This is from Vatican City, and this is Michelangelo's Pieta. And in Pieta, he is showing Mary, Jesus' mother, holding her dead son. It is absolutely beautifully carved out of marble. And it is proportionate. It is designed to be a study in realism, as well as a snapshot of what no doubt must be a very poignant moment, where Mary, the Mother of Heaven, is holding the child of God, but she's doing this as a mom who's just lost her oldest son. And it's at once, it is both astounding theologically, at the same time as being a very human expression. The real world Mary feeling for her real world dead son. Is it successful? That's when we start thinking, well, what's the impact? What's the value? How many people see this and are moved? Is the craftsmanship exquisite? Is it amazing? Is it a real honest use of the materials that the artist chose? And I think from a lot of those places, a lot of those points of judgment, this is successful. So these are different questions to ask when you evaluate. So look through there and use your words as you describe and look at these different kinds of things. This is the friendship of St. Francis and Sultan al-Kamil of Egypt is a powerful thing. The reason why this is important is we look at this as a painting and we can describe it, we can analyze it, how the artists would use their materials and their skill to create this. We can interpret this. It's a showing between very much Christian monks and very much a Muslim sultan. And it appears to be there's an angel there to facilitate this meeting. And then we can evaluate it. Is it valuable? It is valuable. It's a record of history. The Fifth Crusade, St. Francis of Assisi was so upset that Christians were going across the Mediterranean Sea to attack the Egyptians in the name of the gospel of love, that he went by himself, went through the military lines, and he was actually kicked and hit with sticks and stuff, but he met Sultan al-Kamil because he felt that no intelligent person would really want to resort to violence if there was any other way. And he wanted to talk theology with the Sultan because he knew he was a smart person. He knew that they could, through their belief and their faith in their own religions, come to an agreement. And what's so fascinating is because of this painting records the meeting of St. Francis of Assisi with Sultan al-Kamil, and their 2-hour initial conversation led to the cessation of hostilities. He actually stopped a world war because they were able to talk as equals for 2 hours. The world war was the Fifth Crusade. So I think that's absolutely amazing. So this painting becomes successful because it relates that story to us, and it shows us that when people speak with respect and care for each other, they can create miracles of understanding. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think it's amazing. So think about that. Here's some of the elements of art and principles of design. Go through and think about those. When you describe something, be precise. When you use your words in reference to this, instead of saying, oh, that's pretty, describe why you think it's beautiful. And use your words with precision. But I want you to watch this video here. This is an important video because this shows how two individuals use those 4 steps: describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate, to look at artwork. And by the time they're done, they've used their vocabulary to think in different ways, and they really bring out a lot of interesting things about the piece that when you initially see it, you probably don't think of. So make sure you watch that video. We also talk about the flow state. And what is really amazing about the flow state is how it accesses different levels of consciousness. And I'm trying to get to that, and my internet is acting just a little bit funky. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a little bit as I go and try to get to the flow state. Okay, now it's showing up. You've heard the term flow state. Have you ever been in a situation, and it could be that you are playing a game, it could be that you are reading a book, maybe you're making something. I'm sorry about that. Let's see if we can, okay. There was that little patch up here that was doing something weird, and I tried to fix that. Maybe you're talking to a friend or a family member, or you're just out hiking. And then it dawns on you that hours have gone by and you don't remember the passage of time. All you do remember is being in that special realm that you were in, reading your book, talking to your friend, or hiking. That departure from time and real pure focus, that is called the flow state. And we can actually get into it on purpose. Okay, now I'm gonna go share this page with you. This gentleman is named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So that I usually can say his name with quite a bit more confidence, but today is not the day. And he does a lot of work talking about happiness. And what's interesting is he talks about the factors of happiness as they relate to the flow state. And he's found that when people get outside of that real tight awareness of the passage of time, it opens up the door to possibilities of happiness as well, which I think is really interesting. And this talks about motivation. So go through all this material, please, and read it and look at this thing. And what is really fascinating about this, I was watching something about the Heart Math Institute in Oregon, where somebody was talking about how if you are wet and miserable and cold, you will be happy when you get to a place that is warm and dry, and where you're holding like a mug of something hot, like hot chocolate or hot tea. You have something that will fill your belly so you're not feeling hungry anymore. But, and there is a very big difference between being miserable and being satisfied. But when you're satisfied, it's really a lot more difficult thing to measure the expansion of satisfaction if the fire is a more expensive fire, or in a flashier fireplace, or if the hot cocoa, if you've just stepped in out of the cold and you're on the brink of starvation, if that hot cocoa was bought at Walmart or at a specialty boutique in Switzerland, that doesn't seem to make a lot of a much bigger difference than going from dissatisfaction to satisfaction. So somehow happiness is more related to our awareness of comparisons almost. And I just think that's really interesting. This talks about external and internal motivations. And what is really fascinating to me is that as people are being interviewed about happiness, whether or not they have money, whether or not they have status, whether or not they have power or possessions, the happiness comes with how they use these things in relationship to these internal motivations. I know several people who have an awful lot of money. And when you ask them why they are so happy, they will talk about the memories that that money has made with their family. They'll talk about their power and possessions in relationship to how that has facilitated the connections that they have and the friendships that they have and the hobbies that they have. And it's interesting to me because these things have become the tools to help expand these things. I think that's just really, really interesting. That's not for everybody, but that's for a lot of people. Money does not buy necessarily happiness, that phrase. But what money does give is opportunities to express those things. And there's plenty of opportunities without that as well. But I just think that that's really interesting that they still talk about family connection and closeness with other people. So look at all these different kinds of things. What is really fascinating to me is that the flow state is something that consistently applies when we go into a state of focus in something that we are really interested in, whatever that is. I've hit the flow state painting, doing stained glass, designing, writing, hiking. I love hiking with my wife, and a lot of the times we'll be holding hands and realize that we've been out for like an hour and a half just hiking around, and we're so enamored of the views around us and the taste of the air that we are completely outside the passage of time. I think that's really interesting. But if you want to inhabit the state of flow, that's a really cool place to be, because a lot of scientists believe that is, in addition to Mahali, where happiness resides, they also see that is where constructive creativity resides as well. This is where you get a lot of your work done, and you get it done efficiently when you find yourself in that flow state. And you can get to it by focusing on what you're doing to the extent that you are ignoring everything around you. And I just think that's really fascinating. I also recommend watching Tom Shadyak's movie I Am. I believe it is on Netflix. It might still be on it, but he talks a lot about finding that flow state. Why is that important as it relates to art? Because a lot of these beautiful things that we see, and when we think about what makes art, were created or designed by artists that were in their flow state. Now, this is what the quiz looks like, and we're going to do a preview. All of these quizzes you can take multiple times. So if you don't get a perfect score, go back and retake it. And it will, as many times as you want to, and you will keep getting better and better. So there's no reason not to get a perfect score on each of these. Let's see, there are several different questions, and we can go through. Art is connected to self-reported happiness. Is that true or false? I think we just talked about that. I'm going to say yes. I want to leave it blank because I just want to show you what the questions are. Next question is, if a person is in a flow state, they're thinking about what they want to do later. Flow state is when you're so focused on what you're doing that you don't think about anything else. You're not even aware of the passage of time. So question 3. We talked about the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi in class. What inspired him to study psychology? I think that when you look at that, we could probably go back right now and see that. Give me just a second here, and I'll share that screen so we can find exactly that part where he talks about it. what inspired him to study psychology? Now I'm quiet and I'm not sharing the screen because I'm pulling this interview up that he had, because I really like that. Or at least I'm trying to pull it up. And I'm sorry to Charity. I don't know why the computer kicked us off out of the call. Okay, talks about him coming to Italy. Let's see, I'm going to show this to him. He witnessed adults during World War II, and that's what first sparked his interest in positive psychology. Viktor Frankl was in the concentration camps during World War II. One of the things he said was that he noticed people could decide to be happy or not, regardless of circumstances. And Mihaly noticed this too, and it was very fascinating to him, and that's what inspired him to study positive psychology. So if we go back to this, here's the question, and there's the answer. Question 4. Any minute now, we'll get to it. Okay. Which of the following is flow state linked to? Well, what's fascinating to me is we talked about the exterior motivations and interior motivations, and it seems like the flow state was linked directly to the interior motivations. And status, power, and possessions were all exterior motivations. So that's a good way to think about it. And going to question number 5, which 2 factors are important for someone to enter a flow state? I think focus, strength, endurance, challenge, and ability, the right work-life balance. This is a question I think we'll have to look at again. I'm going to say it's probably challenge and ability. Let's see if we can. What factors contribute to happiness, motivation, a flow state? The happiest people spend a lot of time in a state of flow, a state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience itself is so enjoyable that people will do it even at great cost for the sheer sake of doing it. It says the graphs show how important it is for a relationship between 2 variables, skill level and challenge. If we come back to this, we look, here's challenge and ability. Ability is another word for skill level. So I am going to try to get out of this now. You guys can take as long as you want on all the quizzes and everything, and that doesn't bother me at all. And I know that there is a time factor for some of the classes you take about you can only spend so much on the quizzes, but in this class that is not the case. You can take the quizzes as many times as you want. In fact, if you have any problems retaking anything, let me know, because that means that I messed up and didn't open it up for you to retake something. This first written written reflection for this, it used to be that the reflections were a lot longer, and I do think they probably need to be a little bit longer than what they are. But I think for the most part, if you're writing about it, but I do want to talk about what this particular one is. Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have this link takes you to their online collection. I want you to find a piece of artwork that speaks to you, and then in 150 words, and 150 words is maybe 8 or 10 sentences. See if you can describe, why did the artwork catch your eye? what do you think inspired the artist who made it? And in what ways do you think the artist might have entered a flow state while making the artwork? What were the challenges and what were the skills required? So this gives you an opportunity to express a little bit of the tools of artistic critique. And those two tools that you're going to be using are description, why did this artwork catch your eye? And analysis, or actually interpret what inspired the artist who made it. So those two, description and interpretation. So think about that, and you can even go back and ask yourself those questions when you go to this. But so in 150 words, you're going to be answering these three questions. And the easiest way to do this is write 1, and then write 50 words on it. 2, write 50 words about answering that number 2. And 3, and then write the number 3 and 50 words on in what ways did the artist enter into a flow state, do you think? And these are just your conjectures. So don't worry about it being right or wrong. Just do your best in explaining what you're seeing. Now, I'm going to go to the next one, the studio drawing. You have two studio expressions here, drawing simple designs and drawing upside down. And these are both really important, and I'll explain in just a minute why they're both important. The simple designs exercise is we have a number of different designs to do, and what your object is to copy it as close as you possibly can to the original. So you notice there's 3 designs. There's this. This one looks like a heart monitor is the second one. This one looks almost like a castle wall. And then this design. And I will give you a hint. The easiest way to do this is actually to draw a grid of some sort, like down the middle here, down here, maybe a couple lines right here. And then on your own paper, make a rectangle that is pretty close to the same proportion and very lightly draw the same grid lines. And transfer over just very lightly each of the grid squares that you come across. And then once you've done that and it's all very light, then you can go in and darken the lines as you become more confident with them. So you want to get this as close as you possibly can. And same with these. Count how many. There's 5 of these crenellations. There's 5 of these peaks. 3 of them are this shape, and 3 of them are this shape, shallower. So get this just as close as you can. I actually had a student that printed this page off and then took a photo of it thinking that I wouldn't know. That doesn't count. Because what we're doing is we're eliciting something of the flow state. You will be focusing so much on the skills required to do this that you won't realize how much time goes by when you're working on it because you're so focused. So that's what that assignment is. And the whole point of the exercise is to get as close as you can to this, paying attention to how things relate to each other and the relative size and shape of these things. And remember, in this class, you're not judged on your artistic ability, but rather your ability to follow directions. So like I said, do a very light grid, do your best. And I would recommend doing with a very light pencil, doing something where you kind of block out the highest point, the lowest point, how long it is, and then kind of divide it up regularly so you get the right number of divisions, and then make these as even and straight as you can. And as you're concentrating, you will notice that time you'll kind of start to lose track of what is going on around you, which I think is really interesting. Now this one, I really like this one. This is an exercise that the most famous artists you can think of through time have all done. And drawing upside down is important for a couple reasons. So we'll get to that. There we go. Remember we talked about the 2 sides of the brain, the right side and the left side. As you are drawing upside down, you are engaging the non-logical side of your brain. Because what you're doing, whenever we look at an object, one of the reasons why faces look different than what we intend is because we know what an eye is. But we think we know what an eye looks like because we know what an eye is. And what we actually draw, instead of being the eye that we see, most of the time what we draw is our symbol for an eye. And so what, if you're right away, you can tell that this is a horse. That's fine. It is a horse, no doubt about it. But if it was right side up, when we'd be drawing it, we'd be drawing a symbol of a horse rather than what we see. And what is really neat about drawing upside down is you'll do the thing where you divide it into grid lines. Maybe you're going to divide it into a couple vertical strips and several horizontal strips, and then you'll lightly transfer each square over onto your onto your new piece of paper. And as you do this upside down, you're going to be concentrating on the wiggle of this line, how wide the space is between these two lines, what these shapes are, the wiggle of this line, how close this particular shape comes to the edge of the rectangle. You're going to be concentrating on that, and time will slip away again, but you're going to be concentrating on these different shapes rather than the idea that this is a horse. And it helps us to do a better job drawing. And what is really interesting is if you want to, you can print this out, this image out, have it right side up and try to draw it, and then draw it again upside down. Or do it the other way, draw it upside down first and then try to draw it when you know it's a horse. And I think you'll find that the upside down drawing is going to look better than the right side up one. Again, because we have a habit of drawing the symbol of something rather than what we actually see. So that is what we're covering this week. And again, with the due dates, everything for each module should be due on the following Sunday for that week. If you have a problem, if due dates look wonky or whatever, email me and let me know. I don't want you guys getting stressed out. This is supposed to be a fun class, and I want you to think about these concepts. And if you want to talk to somebody about what you're seeing in the class and what you're doing, or even have them do it with you. I had one student that really enjoyed this class because they had to babysit, I think it was either their niece or their little sister every week. And they did the exercises with that little girl. And they had so much fun doing that because it gave an activity for the girl to be engaged with while they were babysitting, and they could also get their homework done. So, that's a great use of time, I think, right there. But as you do these exercises, think about the concepts involved and how they can possibly relate to your regular life. And I hope that you find very quickly that you recognize that these things can help with pretty much everything. And if you have a job at Chick-fil-A, you're probably saying to yourself, that's a bunch of hooey, because how could the Tools of Artistic Critique ever help me in Chick-fil-A? Well, if you're at the counter and you're helping customers, the kind of close looking that you need to do when you describe a piece of artwork will help you as you're trying to listen to the person give their order. And knowing or kind of guessing at what the person means, what they're pointing at, seeing how they're ordering. If you don't understand the words that they're using, you can get a pretty good idea of what they mean because of the rest of the language the rest of the way that they're communicating. And then you'll verify what they mean and find what the interpretation is by repeating their order back to them. And then gauging on the happiness and how accurate that you got the order, that's how you can evaluate the situation. So you've used the 4 tools of artistic critique at your job at Chick-fil-A. and it can apply to everything. And in the jobs that I've had over the years, everything from vacuuming carpet all the way to, because I used to do a lot of different jobs in my younger years, all the way to teaching and designing windows for churches and temples. These tools have helped me quite a bit just in the process of understanding what somebody is trying to tell me. So I hope that really helps you as you are move forward. And I'm going to stop the recording now. Just when you do your attendance, remember to write down the 3 things that you learned from this meeting. And remember also not to stress about due dates and things like that, but we do want to try to get everything done by the Sunday at the end of the week for each module. So if you have any questions, email me, and please do what you can to show up in person for the next Teams meeting. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. I'm really liking what I'm seeing that you folks are turning in. It's very exciting. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you on next Tuesday.